Hello, Husky fans, and welcome to the very first episode of the UConn Daily Podcast. This is Aman Kidwai. I am joined by John Silver. Proud to be presenting this production to you today on this wonderful evening or morning, depending on what time you're listening. John Silver, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Aman. Thanks for setting this up. And I'm excited to see what we do here with the UConn Daily.
Absolutely. So the UConn Daily, you all know it as a newsletter. It is now going to hit you on YouTube and the podcast waves. We'll be ramping up to getting this podcast to an everyday status, but until then, we'll try and get this out twice a week to you guys with a newsletter once a week as well. That will all be under the UConn Daily banner. John, why are we starting the UConn Daily, and why is it coming to us now in a video and podcast format?
One of the reasons that I started UConn Daily 6 years ago. Now we've been doing this daily newsletter for 6 years. Is a way for me, as I left the media field in Connecticut, to stay connected to one of my passions, which is sports. And I owe my career to UConn sports. So it's not only a career, it's a passion. We started this, and I thought 6 years ago's newsletters is a great forum. And as we've seen over the years, things such as Substack, a lot of newsletters are out there now. And one of the reasons why we felt that the UConn Daily was a good product for our market is, there's a lot of content out there, but how do you summarize it? How do you aggregate it? How do you go deeper in analysis? And I think one of the big things that we were able to do there is we took, like, what's the top story in UConn sports that day, and we riffed off it. And after 6 years, though, things changed. The media landscape's changing even more. We also Zach Boyer and I, who when we started it, he was living in England. Now he's living in Kansas. So, it's become more difficult to run it every day. Number two is the media landscape has changed in Connecticut. I mean, we've seen, like, where Hearst Connecticut media's consolidation. So we've lost the Journal-Inquirer. We lost the Record Journal. We've lost Bridgeport and New Haven have the same writers. And now even Waterbury Republican American was bought by Hearst. So, we're getting this consolidation. So now there's only one or two people writing things. So let's evolve. What does the UConn fan want? And when I look at all my experience in covering UConn, all my experience in media, what my number one goal is when we look at this is to really focus on the fan. What does the fan want? What do they need to know? What do they want to hear? Now, that doesn't mean everything's candy and rainbows. It's what they need to know and what they want to hear. They want to hear the truth. They want to hear why UConn lost, not why the other team had a great game and won. And this is kind of the forum now. I'm really excited. We've jumbled the podcast for a long time. I want to thank Aman for really pushing me to do this. And, I think I'm really excited to see what kind of content we come up with. And listen, I could talk UConn on a podcast, on the radio, in your living room, in the middle of on a bus. And I've done it in airplanes, in bars in Arizona, meeting fans. So, it's something I think we should have a lot of fun doing. And I think something the market needs, Aman. I think you feel the same way.
Absolutely, John. You hit on a lot of really great points there. For me, I'm a longtime follower of your work from back at the Manchester Journal-Inquirer, as well as SNY back in the day, your SNY blog. And you did great work with the UConn Daily. And so tremendous, opportunity here to partner together. And like you said, we had one of those discussions at a bar and said, man, just the state of things, it's not great. And it's crazy. I have long thought of myself as someone really new on the scene, but then I look at the calendar and it's been 12 years, John, for me with the UConn blog. And, the remarkable thing is that I basically have just the same exact observation on a shorter time frame. It's that in my 10, 12 years doing this, the landscape has changed dramatically. How I run the UConn blog, how I run its social media, it's so different compared to how I thought about running it 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Today at UConn Huskies does a lot of the stuff that we were doing on social media before, to their credit. And then, like you mentioned, local media, man, it's just getting smaller. There's fewer voices, and they are themselves constrained. This is no shade at them or anyone involved in that. Those guys and gals do really good work. They're just really constrained by the organizations that we're a part of. And hey, you and I know that in the year 2024, two guys can hop on their microphones, they can post it on YouTube, they can get their podcast out on Spotify. So let's do that. Let's get a daily show going. And same here. I just love to talk UConn sports. I don't actually love Twitter, but I do enjoy talking UConn sports. Have always enjoyed talking UConn sports with you, John. So I think we're going to have a really great time doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you, Aman.
Perfect. So let's get into it then. All right, men's basketball, John. They've won 2 championships in a row. They come into this season turning over a lot of the roster. Still go into the season with a lot of hype, a lot of expectations. Even though there are many, many new faces. They begin solid enough before a 3-game skid in Maui, which, we should all address. They had this skid in Maui where they looked super beatable. They did not look like the juggernaut Huskies, but since their return, they've rattled off 7 straight wins. They've beat Baylor. They've won at Texas. They beat Gonzaga on a neutral site. John, what are your thoughts so far on just the arc, just the journey so far of this UConn season through Maui and now looking completely different?
This reminds me of that 2023 stretch, with the first title when they lost, 3-4 games at the turn of the year. Part of it was caused by one of Dan's medulla hijacks where he can't stop himself from getting a technical and influence in the game. Those are one of those things with Dan's passion is what drives this team. So, but then it goes overboard and he knows it. But you got to take it the good with the bad. If you're going to cost your team a game once every 2 years, but you win 2 national titles, I think we'll take it. It's just, what you do is you're going to pray that it doesn't happen in a huge spot. It doesn't happen in March. Doesn't happen in Big East tournament. Doesn't happen at a big game. And I think he really is. He can control that big picture if he gets himself in the mood. It's like, okay, but it's that competitiveness. I feel like Dan coaches like he's playing, and it's really difficult for a player to remove the emotion from the game because that's how they play. That's how they put out maximum effort. So, it's the good with the bad. Do I love it? No. I don't like, I like more of the Brad Stevens, Jerry Tarkanian chomp on the towel and coach, because I think he's a brilliant coach and he does like a lot of great stuff on the X's and O's and he motivates and he teaches. But, you got to let players' personalities, you got to let coaches' personalities get out there. And, sometimes he goes overboard and, that's what his wife is there for, and Dave Benedict, right? And so I think it's something to watch. No, nobody's perfect, and what are you going to do? As far as this team, that 3-game lose, it's really hard for me to think about it because you can't lose the games they lost to. Now, we all know Dayton's better than the 8th best team in the Maui Invitational. So Dayton's pretty good. UConn was not prepared. They're demoralized after 2 games. So I'm going to throw the Dayton game out. But let's look at Memphis and Colorado. It's a 3-game stretch. It's probably the worst 3-game stretch in UConn, and a good UConn team in a long time. I don't know how we interpret that, because if you look at the metrics, they're 10th in the country, 9th in the country, so that equates to a 3 seed. But is this going to be like 2 years ago when they were a 4 seed in the NCAA tournament because they had that 4 or 5 game losing streak in January? And everybody in the betting odds had them as the number 1 team in the tournament and was going to win the national title. So, it remains to be seen. A 7-game win streak I mean, they're not playing Sisters of the Poor here. So when they, we'll see where they go. And obviously, I know we're going to talk about McNeely a little bit. I am worried about him being limited, but this team, I I can never say they should win a national title, but they can. Because they're a Final Four contender, and once you're in the Final Four, you can get hot from three and win the darn thing, right? So I think there's maybe 10, 12 teams that if they get there, you won't be surprised. UConn's one of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Hurley's competitiveness, it was so interesting to see the national response to that, which was the most pearl clutching thing you have ever seen in your life. Oh my God, the sports coach is yelling. Oh no.
I mean,
it was crazy. And then again, yeah, you're talking about this is a guy who's won 2 straight championships. If this was Coach K, right, or Nick Saban or Kirby Smart, right, acting like that, they're saying this is what it takes to win. This is the cost of winning. Yeah, I mean, to in that very specific moment, I think in that Memphis game, Dan Hurley needed to act slightly differently, maybe. But
yeah.
It certainly didn't warrant a crazy, tisk-tisking from the national media. And it's just not like you said. I mean, Dan Hurley, that competitive spirit is what drives this team. He's in it with his players. And every team has a different journey. So, last year he did not need to do this because he had a juggernaut from day one, basically. 2 years ago, slightly different. 3 years ago, before they were winning championships, that was part of Dan Hurley's thing, was he was constantly, on edge, constantly kind of trying to keep his team on edge. And I think that's something he wanted to bring back with this group because look, in this group, Alex Karaban's the only guy who's won 2 championships. Hassan Diarra was on both rosters. Samson Johnson was on both rosters. Those 2 were not big parts of the 2023 team. So, these guys have not won 2 championships in a row. Most of these guys have not won 1 championship. So I think, in terms of like the mindset of this team, I think Hurley and the staff did feel like they needed to do something. That 3-game stretch, those 3 losses, Memphis, Colorado, Dayton, it's always going to be in the metrics. It's always going to kind of be there. But you just have to give UConn credit. I mean, I know we're in a UConn market and we're, coming off 2 championships and Dan Hurley's won all these Coach of the Year awards, but what a recovery. What a recovery to win 7 straight, to win that Baylor game without Alex Karaban. By the way, everyone asking me that night, what's going to happen? Oh my God. And I'm like, ugh. But they go out and they withstand an early run, and they beat Baylor. That they then on short notice travel to Texas and beat them. Maybe not a great team, maybe missing a guy, but still. And then the Gonzaga win was as solid as you have seen any team perform all season. And so in a year where there is no kind of monster title contender, there's no kind of Purdue or UConn or a Duke or Kansas of old. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. UConn can win the championship. UConn's absolutely a Final Four contender. And, the conclusion here, what a job by Dan Hurley to have, 2 championships in a row. And in this 3rd year, really have a Final Four contender. It does, though, as you mentioned, kind of maybe hinge on Liam McNeely, who has been incredible, I have to say. I mean, what he does all over the court is incredible. But if you're talking about the ceiling of this team, of course, it hinges on what McNeely can do. So how are you feeling about that, just given the recent injury?
Well, I'm very concerned about the injury. Ankle sprains are funny. They said it's not serious. We've all sprained our ankle. Obviously, we're not elite athletes, but I think elite athletes, it's his movement and his movement off the ball and his movement driving is what is great for his game. Like, if I had one concern about this UConn team, and at the beginning of the year was in the middle, that's been answered. It's at the guard spot. It's at the point guard spot. Diarra and Mahaney, Aiden Mahaney. I just don't know that their passing and their creativity is there. Like, there's no Tristan Newton with 10 seconds left on the clock who could make a shot or make a pass to get a guy a shot. And that's kind of what McNeely's been doing. He's been acting as a facilitator. And now he doesn't bring the ball up like a point guard, but in their offense, which is very European style, where there's a lot of passing, space, pace, movement, what they're really doing is I love when they bring McNeely off a corner, get him downhill, off a screen, off a curl, and then he, once he gets up to the double box and he's in the paint, he's able to really make passes. He's able to finish at the rim. He's able to pass out for three. That's their playmaker. He's the one that makes that offense go. Him and Carabin are really the passing guys on offense that really get this team going. I look at Diarra as just an off the ball penetrator facilitator. Mahaney, I wish they play him off ball. I'm not sold on him as a ball handler. I don't like seeing him handle the ball under pressure. But that's okay. They really need McNeely back. Now, this is an opportunity for Jaden Ross and Jalen Stewart, who I feel could use more time. But what, you're going to sit McNeely and Carabin? Right. So this is an opportunity for them. But let's hopefully they take. I expect them McNeely out for at least a week. I mean, you can't roll your ankle then play the next day. I mean, there's just no need at this point. So I think we're going to see a Ross and Stewart get some extended time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll push back on one thing, which is that Diarra has been a monster on the passing front. He's had 7 or more assists in each of the last 6 games. He's had 6 or more in each of his last 9. 11 assists in 2 games, including the game at Texas and the Xavier game. But yeah, he's not as great of a scorer. He's not as, Tristan Newton was a scorer who learned to pass and facilitate. And Hassan Diarra is a, really great passer, really great defender, and an okay scorer, we will say, to be nice. But yeah, I agree with you. McNeely, he does so much, including facilitate. He's a solid defender. He's also just a really great passer. And then the way that he can score essentially at all 3 levels, right? He can drive, he can mid-range, he can do, different stuff. And then he's a 3-point shooter as well. So he really is a key component of this team. I absolutely agree. When they need a bucket, at this point, it's Liam McNeely, when everyone's healthy, even though you have Alex Carabin, you believe in Alex Carabin, and he is that guy and that dog and, the number 1 player on the team. When you really need a bucket, I'm thinking Liam McNeely. Yeah. And so that's super interesting and exciting. And again, it just kind of speaks to, like I was saying earlier, it's a different dynamic on this team. Last year was just, stacked roster, great guys, actually a lot of experience, a lot of talented experience. And, this year it's just different, but they do have depth. I know we're talking about this top line, Carabin, McNeely, what they're doing, but you mentioned a lot of depth as well, which is kind of a crucial component to this. This UConn team can be take on a lot of different identities, both on its own and in terms of what kind of team it can match up against. You mentioned Jalen Stewart, solo ball, Jaden Ross. These are guys who give them quality minutes off the bench and are capable of a little mini run on their own when UConn needs it. So I think having just as many of those guys as possible is really helpful. But yeah, obviously to reach their ceiling, they're going to need McNeely healthy. They're going to need to be really cautious here. McNeely has had some injury stuff. He had, a knee thing, I think, in high school. He had a small thing this past summer, when he went home for the 4th of July. And so, just going to have to be careful. But I will say this is a friendly stretch of schedule to be experimenting and to maybe not have your Liam McNeely, to have your second best scorer, because they've got Providence coming up. Providence is not good. They've lost 7 games. They've lost 3 in a row. They just got rocked by Marquette. They're traveling to Villanova. That might be a tough game, but still. They're traveling to Georgetown. Georgetown is okay. That could still be, tougher than expected, but none of these are crazy challenging games. Then they've got Creighton and Butler at home. So that's the next 5 games. Hopefully Liam McNeely can get himself together before then. After that, I do think it gets tough. You've got Xavier on the road after DePaul at home. You've got the Marquette road game. You've got St. John's right after that, and the Creighton road game. So there's a tough stretch right after this. But I think, McNeely or not, UConn should be cruising in January. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I worry about Providence because I always worry about Providence.
Sure.
When UConn has national title teams, they lose against Providence. I don't. I remember the Ryan Gomes game. It's just a mystery. There was a game like 30 years ago with Eric Murdoch, and it was like 108-102. I don't know how a UConn Jim Calhoun team gave up 108 points to Providence or something like that. But it's like Providence, for whatever reason, they've always played UConn tough. It was like the old Big East was the opposite of BC. BC could have had Bill Russell on the team, and if he puts on a BC Eagle jersey, they're going to lose to the UConn Huskies. All right. As far as Providence, it makes their season. The fans hate losing to UConn over in Providence. They're either more foul mouthed than usual when the Huskies join. So it's always a great environment. I love that game. I'd say I know UConn fans like to think of like who their rivals are. I think in basketball, Providence is their biggest local rival. I love that game. I think it's not quite like Tobacco Road, but Providence does, for whatever reason, Providence plays better against UConn than it does the rest of its schedule. And I think it's because the players are so close. I'm sure they run into each other in the summer in those pro-am leagues or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a great rivalry, and most Providence players, their villain origin story is they don't get recruited by UConn, right?
Yeah, I know,
and,
right?
That's how it goes. Ryan Gomes, Connecticut native, but not that we're trying to get anyone to make any speeches here, but no, the Providence rivalry is a great one. I mean, I would say the challenge has been lack of success on the program side for Providence in really making that. The games have been even. Relatively speaking. And like you said, even when UConn has had its best teams ever, Providence finds a way to win some games there. But Providence just has very little juice itself as a program. So it kind of doesn't break through on a national level when UConn and Providence play because no one nationally cares about the Providence Friars. And I mean that. I say that with all intended respect to the Providence Friars basketball program. We'll see how this game is, but you're right. It's always a rivalry. It's always something that means a little more for the Providence players. It's too close to each other's schools. And that's what we got back when the Big East. So that's going to be a great matchup. Sunday, 2 p.m. NBC tip-off game for the Big East there. So that'll be something exciting. While the NFL playoffs are going on, you'll also make sure to catch the Huskies take on Providence at Gamble Pavilion. UConn might be discounted beer for sale that day.
Yeah, UConn basketball alternative programming to the NFL monster, which is the NFL week 18 exhibition game. So who knows? I mean, I actually like that UConn's kind of diversified. I know they're not a ESPN school anymore, which I think has become a good thing. They're on Fox, they're on NBC, they're on CBS, and they don't get the ESPN machine behind them during the regular season. Once they get out of the MTE tournaments, but it's really great to see them on over-the-air TV. I still think that it brings in more eyeballs and it's easier to find. One of the things with as we saw with that Peacock game, it's difficult to find streaming games still. That's the one thing they haven't cracked yet, those platforms.
Yeah. I mean, that piece of it, I'm on two minds because it's like, look, my parents figured out streaming. It's not that tough, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, yes, it's a perception thing. It's like it's almost a prestige thing, right? Like, if you're on ESPN Plus, that means you're Bush League, and if you're on, something better, that means you're not. And that's the heuristic. That's really it. It's almost that simple.
Yeah.
We don't need to worry about the actual utility of it because right now perception is what UConn is fighting in all of these all of these different realms. Speaking of fighting a perception battle, let's transition to UConn football, who ended its season on really the highest note possible with a 27-14 win over the ACC's North Carolina at the Fenway Bowl. which I really never thought UConn would play in a Fenway Bowl. So great for them for breaking through and doing that, getting the win, beating an ACC opponent, reaching 9 wins on the season, which is an incredible accomplishment for this program, a program that many people thought was dead in the water, that many people said should move back to FCS. We're not going to break down, how you beat UNC, in a bowl game. A lot of different opt-outs and portal stuff going on. Still a good sign for UConn football to be beating North Carolina no matter what. But, John, my question for you, just thoughts and feelings after a 9-win season for UConn football. Wow.
On January 1st, I'm not much on Facebook anymore, but I did log in and check Facebook, and it says Facebook memory 14 years ago, and it's a picture of UConn, me taking a picture from the press box at the Fiesta Bowl, and I'm like, that was UConn's last winning season.
Yeah,
that was 14 years ago. I look the same. I like to think so, but that's not true. I mean, 14 years ago is a lifetime. Like some of those players, they're in coaching now. Like Chief Moore's a coach on the UConn team, and he's in his mid-30s. And when we really think about how long it's been and the journey it's been, I think Jim Moore. Listen, they didn't have a great schedule at UConn this year. Like they lost to the top 4 teams on their schedule, right? But in past years, if they had that schedule with teams like say 3-4 years ago, they would have went 2-10. So there is progress there. UConn's not a top 25 football program right now. I didn't know if it was possible for UConn ever to get back to that level, but let's consider the dynamics that's changed even since Jim Moore has taken over with the transfer portal. And what better coach to navigate college football free agency than a guy who's navigated NFL free agency? And I think it's a mindset about how he's open to massive roster turnover. And what he does is you go into free agency in the NFL, you go to your draft, which is your recruiting, and then you go into free agency to fill needs, and then you see where you are. And, and that's it. These are 1-year contracts that these players are on. And, I think Jim has embraced that. And by embracing that, I think it's going to make you kind of differentiate in the market. My favorite thing that Jim Moore does is when a player announces the transfer portal, which I know some college coaches, just being around college coaches for 15 years, is they hate that. They're like, oh, it's all about me announcing that I'm in the portal. That's a social media thing. That's like a public relations thing, and I'm cool. And he's like, congratulations, you're a great kid. Call me if you want to go. Or, hey, thank you for coming here. And even for a player he wants to keep, Skylar Bell, or the yo-yo that is now Price Yates. I feel that, he lets the kids, he empowers the kids to go into the portal to check their value, because that's what he would do as a head coach. But he's going to try to fight like hell to keep them. That is how coaches should be going through. I think he's shown, especially for a group of 5 coaches or non-power 2 coaches, but this is going to happen to mid-tier programs in the ACC. They're going to get picked apart. They have to be able to embrace the system. You can't complain. We're not going to take transfers. Players aren't committed anymore. It was like, well, I'm sorry, coach. You'd leave for a nickel. Why can't the player? I don't like it either. I think this reminds me of baseball when free agency back in the 70s. Now I wasn't around then to understand it, but reading about it, there was Charlie Finley, who was the Oakland A's owner at the time. He thought that make them all free agencies every year, and of course everybody said you couldn't do that. But that actually is the most free market when you really think about it, like, because players are going to find their value. You play for performance from year to year, and that's actually the most efficient way to find your economic value is after every year you're reassessed. Sometimes it's going to be good for players, sometimes it's going to be bad for players. Like How many $4 million quarterbacks are you going to allow sit on the sideline for 2 years? I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense. Like I can go get the best 5th-year quarterback out here. So I really think it's going to change. It's really changed the way recruiting is and how you build a roster. I just think it's a development game, but it's an accelerated development. And that's what I think his Jim is good at. Is look at Skylar Bell. He played a little bit at Wisconsin. Now he comes here. He's a star now. So now, does UConn want to keep him? Yeah. What's the best you can do? Now, hopefully he has some loyalty, so there's the hometown discount. But if Michigan wants him, he has to weigh. He's like, do I want to be the number one at UConn, or do I want to compete for the 1-2 at Michigan? And I want to play in the NFL. This is my last stop. He's going to get a shot. So we say he's going to have to weigh that. But options, the one thing I love about Jim Mora and this regime here at UConn is they're not afraid for their players to have options. And that's something that you can't say about the rest of the college football world. Like, their college coaches want to go back to indentured servitude.
Right. Yeah. No, I think your Mora has that. It's a consistent thing about Mora. He's embraced a lot of aspects of the modern game. And I think that's what you could say any previous UConn football coach, even the successful one, but especially the not successful ones, they really just did not embrace anything new that was going on in college football. And right now, that would be an absolute death knell because so much is changing. We were talking about like Paul Pasqualoni, Bob Diaco. Things were so slow moving then. And even then, those guys were behind, like behind the times on just like passing and offense and, not that kind of stuff. And now it's like, look, you got to be an adult about the roster, right? Like, do you think Bob Diaco would have been like that? He didn't have the temperament for it at that time. And so I totally agree. I think there's a lot of elements of just Mora and his mindset that are working well. And just look what they have accomplished. Who cares how hard the schedule is or is not? Yeah. They won 9. They won 9 games. They blew out FAU and Buffalo. And then they won some real gutsy ones over Rice, UAB. And so I think it's, and to say, first bowl win since the 2009 season, first winning season, like you mentioned, since the 2010 season. I mean, that's horrific, but it's actually been worse than that. Those sentences don't even explain how bad it got in 2018, 2019. We're talking about the stats saying UConn was the worst defense in FBS history, in 2018-19. There's no hope. Everyone's saying, shut down the program, move to FCS. Even FCS, you won't be good. So then what? And, that was the state of things. So just, to get out of that and to not have every week be the should this program exist conversation. So glad. I'm so glad to be out of that. Hopefully we reach a point where we're just talking about, the tackle football on a week-to-week basis. But with UConn football, it feels like the off-field stuff is always going to be more interesting and more important because, like you mentioned, there's this portal stuff, right? Every offseason, I think unlike the NFL, every offseason, free agency really makes a difference. The NFL free agency is like really for, pieces, small pieces. You don't do full roster builds from NFL free agency. We learned in the 90s, you don't do that. That doesn't work. The Washington football team tried that. It really didn't work. But just, UConn being in a good place, UConn getting out of that hole and structurally looking like it has what it needs to succeed. And by that, I mean, even if Mora were to leave, Jim Mora goes away tomorrow, UConn still has fan support. UConn has the NIL machine that is good for its level in the group of 5, maybe even competitive at the bottom of the Power 4, which is, I think, what UConn's goal is. But that's really the question that I think UConn football needs to answer still, despite this good season, is what is the goal of this program, right? Are you trying to get into a conference? Are you trying to be, Penn State? Are you trying to be Maryland, Rutgers? Like obviously Rutgers is not really an aspirational thing besides its conference payout, but what's the goal of this UConn football program? What do you think, John?
Well, Rutgers, aspirationally, or at least financially, the team would like to have Rutgers revenues.
Of course.
I would like to see what this program could do. And UConn does sports well. Like, it's just not money. Like, Rutgers has all the money. There should be no reason that Rutgers is not good at basketball in New Jersey. And, and I love Steve.
Or anything, or any sport.
UConn. Yeah, and I don't know why some schools do it better, but UConn's a sports school. When they invest in something, they win. It's just something unique to this area and the kind of athletes can attract. Maybe we're really good at getting coaches here. I mean, to go from Jim Calhoun, Kevin Ollie, kind of like forced into the job. One did a good job early, not so great job late, but then they add a great coach. And the great coach doesn't happen just because he's a great coach. It's the atmosphere with the coach. He's like, I can't believe somebody who grew up watching UConn in the dream season would laud a Hurley and welcome the Hurley family of all into the UConn fold. But he's perfect for UConn. I remember his brother Bobby tearing up UConn's press in 1990. But also Dan's a Seton Hall guy, but he's as UConn is out there. I mean, he's the perfect kind of coach that encapsulates what Connecticut and New England is, even though he's a little bit of Jersey fight with a little bit of Connecticut chip on his shoulder, New England chip on his shoulder. Connecticut, we don't have chips, we're just cranky. But and that's the thing is with this program, it has to get into a league. Now, but it can't. UConn's different. It can't just get into any league because you do have to I'm not 100%. You have to do whatever is best for basketball, protect basketball. That's not what it is. But you can't put your program in a worse position. So the only logical places for UConn sports would be, unless there's a new conference forms, which you never know, but would be Big 12 or ACC. I mean, Big 10, of course, but hey, I want to win $1 billion as well. But I think those are only two. Barring those two, they're going to have to cobble it together, and it's going to be a lot more difficult. UConn's the only true independent out there. Now, I know people say Notre Dame's an independent, but Notre Dame has an ACC affiliation. They have a certain number of games every year that is the ACC. And they can join the ACC at any time. So
they also have a hard line to the committee.
To the committee,
they organize college football.
Yeah, they are college football. So, they are their own conference. So they act like their own conference. They get all the money. It's great. Congratulations, Notre Dame. I think you're going to win a title this year. It's been a long time since 1988. But so UConn's only independent out there. When I see Army going out back into a league, what does that tell you? Yeah. So what could you I'll be interested to see what the Pac-12 looks like. I think the Big 12 is nuts for not trying to move east. There's a cultural issue with bringing in a New England school into the Big 12. The farther you go west, until you hit the West Coast, it's just a really hard bridge for the Oklahoma States, the Texas Techs to do culturally, because those are really regional schools that have a pride in that we're our own culture. West Virginia kind of fits into that culture. That's why they work. I'd argue West Virginia is the Northeast. I don't think their fans would say so, but Pittsburgh's the Northeast. Why isn't West Virginia? It's 50 miles away, 80 miles away. Morgantown's 80 miles away from Pittsburgh. So, and West Virginia was always Northeast football before it became like, oh, we're actually, until they rebranded as some Southern school. But, where do they go? ACC makes sense, Syracuse, BC. But, the ACC has its own problems, and I think they'd rather fold as a league than bring UConn in out of spite. It would be is the way it is at this point because they allowed SMU into the league by paying for it.
Right.
I
UConn
mean,
cannot afford that,
and
no matter
and
what.
then SMU took a playoff spot out of the ACC. I mean, it's just embarrassing. I mean,
Yeah.
SMU, this is a death penalty school that now in an area where what it got banned for is legal. They have billions of dollars apparently from oil. I love the program. It's a historic football program when you look at it, over the course of 100 years. But the ACC, I mean, it just makes no sense at all. So who knows?
It's definitely weird times. I think you make a great point. Just look, something else matters besides money. UConn has been able to succeed in not just one sport, but many sports. Whenever it's on an equal playing field, it competes. Even in football, that was true. Competitive with Pitt and Syracuse when they were in the same conference. So yeah, I mean, I think it's been a great season for UConn football. They do need to get into a conference. I used to be of the opinion that it should be any conference. Get into the Sun Belt. Get into the Sun Belt football only. I've backed off of that now. I think it's you really need to have an answer for this revenue sharing that's about to come down the pike, and you have to have an answer for that $20 million budget that you're going to have to that you're going to be allowed to have. And so I agree with you. It's got to be Big 12. It's got to be Big 12 or ACC. And, some national media seems to feel like, now might be the time. Football ahead of schedule at 9-4, two valuable basketball programs. That might be enough. So we'll see where it goes. That's going to do it for us on this episode of the UConn Daily. Thank you all for listening and watching.